Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive with us here at Miko TV. We like to get into the facts, and that's what we're going to try to do today. We're talking about this mid-air collision outside of D.C. Obviously, American Airlines jet, a Black Hawk helicopter involved, and, tragically, everybody on board, both aircraft perished,
Mm.
all 67 people. So we want to, talk about what we know and, maybe what we don't.
Yeah, it's a really sad story. And, I think when you see something like this happen, it really does make you wonder how this could be possible, especially in such a, busy and important airspace.
For sure. So let's lay out the basics for everyone. We've got this passenger jet and a military helicopter colliding
Yeah.
just outside of D.C. I mean, right away you think, how does this happen in such a controlled airspace?
Yeah. You've got
Yeah.
these two very different aircraft,
Right.
and they're operating pretty close to each other. And that takes a ton of coordination and communication to keep everybody safe, especially in a place like DC.
Right. And this is where things get a little strange. The FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, they came out and said that the staffing at the air traffic control tower at Washington National Airport wasn't normal at the time.
Yeah, and what's really interesting here is that it seems like one single controller was handling both the helicopter and the airplane traffic,
Mm.
which, normally that's a job for two people. So that's a big difference from how things are usually done. And it makes you wonder if somebody made a mistake.
Okay, so I need you to break this down a bit more for me and for our listeners. You're the expert here. How big of a deal is this? What kind of pressure is that controller under?
So imagine you're in this high pressure situation,
Yeah.
right? People's lives are on the line. You're talking to all these pilots. You're watching the radar screen, and you have to make sure those planes stay apart. Now imagine you have to do twice that work because you're the only one there. It's a lot. And that's why they usually have two people. It's about sharing the work and having someone to double check you.
Yeah. Wow, that sounds incredibly intense.
Yeah.
And then on top of all of this, former President Trump, he, chimes in on social media and asks why the helicopter didn't just move out of the way of the jet. He pointed out that it was a clear night. The lights on the plane would have been easy to see.
Yeah, and that's where I think things get even more complicated. When someone like a former president says something like that, it really affects how people see the whole thing, even if, there's no real proof behind it. It's like people want to find a simple reason for what happened. It's hard to accept that it could just be a random mistake.
And it really throws more fuel on the fire, especially these days. It's 2025. Information spreads so fast on social media. It's this constant stream of stuff, a lot of it not even true. And that really changes how we understand events like this.
Exactly, and it taps into how our brains work. We like to find explanations, especially when something terrible happens that doesn't seem fair. We want to make sense of it. So when you have a tragedy like this and there are no clear answers, people start to guess and rumors spread, and sometimes those rumors turn into conspiracy theories. It's like we're wired to look for patterns, to try to figure things out. And sometimes that leads people to these conspiracy theories.
Right.
And in this case, we're seeing all kinds of stuff. Some people say there's a cover-up going on, maybe to hide something embarrassing, or some think it was a deliberate attack, like someone was targeting certain people on those flights. It's wild.
Yeah, it really is. So where does that leave the investigation? It feels like people don't really trust what's going on.
And I get it. People want answers. They want someone to be held responsible, and that's totally fair. I think the hardest thing for the investigators is going to be getting that trust back. They have to do a really thorough investigation, be totally transparent, and then tell the public exactly what they found in a way that everyone understands.
Some people might say that being too open could actually hurt the investigation. How do you balance that with the public's need to know?
It's tricky, but I think the most important thing is to keep those lines of communication open. If people feel like they're part of the process, they're more likely to accept the outcome, even if it's not what they were hoping for. This isn't just about satisfying people's curiosity. It's about learning from this awful event and making sure it never happens again.
You said learning from it. What kind of stuff are investigators looking at in a case like this?
Everything. They're listening to the air traffic control recordings, looking at radar data, examining the wreckage. Literally anything that could give them a clue. They'll talk to witnesses, the controller who was on duty that night, anyone who saw the planes before it happened. It's like putting a puzzle together. Sometimes the smallest piece can be the key.
So it's all the technical stuff, but then you've got that human side too. I can't imagine the weight on that controller's shoulders knowing so many lives were in their hands. And for the families of the victims waiting for answers while this investigation goes on, it's got to be so hard.
Absolutely. It's a level of grief and loss that most of us can't even fathom. They deserve answers. They deserve to know what happened to their loved ones, why it happened, and if someone did something wrong, they deserve justice. We can't forget about the people at the heart of this while we're talking about all the data and the theories.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in all that and forget that real lives were shattered. So we've talked about all this, the weird staffing, the public not trusting what's happening, the need for transparency. What stands out to you as the most important thing for this investigation moving forward?
Accountability. If mistakes were made, whether it was a human error or a problem with the system itself, whoever's responsible needs to be held accountable. And it has to be done in a way that's transparent and fair. That's the only way to get people to trust the process again. Otherwise, the rumors and conspiracy theories are just going to keep going, and we'll miss a chance to really learn from this and stop it from happening again.
It's about more than just finding out what happened. It's about making sure it doesn't happen again. And this accident, as horrible as it is, it raises some really big questions about aviation safety in a world that's changing so fast.
Exactly. We've got more and more planes in the air, commercial flights, private planes, and now you've got drones too. It's getting more crowded up there, and that means more risks. This tragedy is a wake-up call. We can't afford to be complacent when it comes to safety. Every flight, every takeoff, and landing it all relies on people making the right decisions, the right technology, and the right rules working perfectly together. And when one of those things breaks down, the consequences can be devastating.
That's a pretty scary thought.
Yep.
Makes you realize just how much responsibility everyone in aviation has.
It does. We can't stop every accident from happening, but we can learn from each one and try our best to make the skies safer for everyone.
And you mentioned AI earlier, and I gotta say, that makes me think of all those sci-fi movies where the robots take over. Where do we draw the line between using technology to help us and relying on it too much? What about human instinct and all that experience?
Yeah, that's a good point. We have to be careful about that. AI can be super helpful, but it shouldn't be making all the decisions.
Yeah.
We still need human controllers. They have the experience, the judgment, and they can adapt to unexpected situations.
Right, and that brings us back to that whole transparency and accountability thing. We need to know that the systems are designed to keep people safe, first and foremost.
Exactly. And that means having strong oversight and good investigations. We need to be able to spot potential problems before they turn into disasters. This collision should be a wake-up call. We can't just sit back and assume everything's fine when it comes to aviation safety. Every single flight, every takeoff, and landing it all depends on a lot of different things working together perfectly. People making the right decisions, the technology functioning correctly, and the rules being followed. And when one of those things goes wrong, the results can be horrible.
It's a sobering thought for sure. It really highlights how much responsibility everyone in aviation has.
Definitely. We can't prevent every accident, but we can learn from each one and try to make flying safer for everyone.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's really important to remember the human cost of this tragedy. 67 people lost their lives, and so many others were affected by this.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in the details, but we can't forget that real people are grieving and looking for answers.
It's a tragedy that we should never forget. It reminds us that we all have a responsibility to make sure our skies are safe.
And to everyone listening out there, I hope this deep dive has given you something to think about. As we move forward, it's important to stay informed, ask questions, and demand transparency and accountability from the people responsible for aviation safety. In the end, it's about preventing these kinds of tragedies from happening again and honoring the memories of those we've lost.
Yeah, it's about remembering that every life lost in an accident like this means the system failed in some way. It's a call to do better, to learn from what happened, and work towards a future where these kinds of tragedies are just a distant memory.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another look at a complex and interesting topic. Until then, stay curious, stay informed,